all over town. Words without sound condemned me and left me for dead all over again. It wasn't the first time, but this time things will never be the same. Ride the very thought into the ground in the church of lost and found. The angels cry, ride until the darkness closes in, until the ravaged soul begins to reflect the open skies. The chapel was burned, razed to the ground. From the darkest of clouds, small birds tumbled like rain, time and again. You may go charging at windmills in these days, absurdities never change.
All right, perfect. So we're here right now with Michael Staley, and he's talking to us from England. And we're here about to start this with. You want to do sort of an intro?
Yes, well, good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are, because we have people of different countries. Once again, we are gathered here. We are friends and brothers of this complex called the Gnostic Extreme of the Extreme South, Gnostic Enclave, or Sacred Engineering. We are gathered here for a new episode of our adventure. Today is a special day because Mr. Michael Staley is with us. Is a luxury
Digitally.
luxury guest for us, without a doubt. Thank you, Mr. Staley, for
It's okay.
here with us today. Well,
My pleasure.
my name is Edward, is
Hernán,
Pablo,
Pablo.
Paul, Jose Luis.
JL, JL.
Well, we would like to do some questions, if it's possible.
Yeah, sure.
Well,
All right. Yeah. We wanted to know because everything that we know here, usually it comes more from the OTO, the American OTO, because some of us were members a long time ago, and then we left that order, right? So we wanted to know, first of all, for instance, when you write, you also use the greeting as they do in Thelema in general. Do you use it also within the order? Do you keep?
Oh, yes.
Customs?
Oh, yeah. Yes. I mean, for instance, if I email an order member, then obviously I use their magical name, and I'll always open and close with "do what they worship with whole of the law, love is the law, love under will." I mean, I do sometimes abbreviate it to 93 and 93, 93 over 93, but kind of only do that where the person seems to insist on it, because I mean, it's just a silly thing, but I just prefer the fully formal thing. I mean, people have been using this 93 for quite a long time. I mean, recently I was looking at a letter from Kenneth Grant to Gerald York, in 1952, and he was using the form there 93. It's just that some people use it when, say, they're dashing off a quick note and they haven't got a lot of time. So it's because, curiously enough, some people do object to just kind of bringing the full thing. I mean, it always puzzled me because it doesn't take that much longer.
No, of course, and it's an interesting tradition to keep. And so I wanted to ask you, it has to do a little bit with this. You mentioned in an interview that, let's say, in England, the tradition as you receive it from Kenneth Grant was less canonical in this. I believe that you meant it in the sense that in the West, usually there is a way to practice Thelema that it is very attached to the writings of Aleister Crowley. And maybe through Grant, there are other things and other ways of working that were incorporated into the current.
Yes, I think so. I mean, really. I mean, for just a minute to address this thing about Crowley and Crowley having received canonical status. I mean, the ironic thing about that is that Crowley's work is very rich. He kind of had various traditions, and he distilled what we might term Crowleyanity from it. So I personally think that sort of people who want to sort of spend time with Crowley, as it were, really ought to go out and read those source materials that Crowley learnt from, rather than just kind of taking it from Crowley, if you know what I mean.
Yes, because he was also the product of his time in a way, and what he considered to be, great writings of the East. Over time, maybe we do not have the same opinion about those writings.
No, that's perfectly true, of course, perfectly true.
Yes, and how does, because we would like to know more about what is the work within the order. For instance, you have grades. How does one work and evolve within the order?
Okay, fine. We're in a period of transition at the moment because moving from the Typhonian OTO into the Typhonian order, and it became apparent to me a few years ago because I came across the surviving documents in Kenneth's papers relating to New Isis Lodge, and particularly the various rituals and practices that he set up in that first year. And it kind of seemed to me that the grade structure was a very, very interesting one. And so I'm kind of reverting to that. When I say grade structure, I don't mean that I would intend to revive New Isis Lodge, because that was a period of its time and it's over and it's finished. But what I mean by that is that when I joined the Typhonian OTO, the grade structure always puzzled me, because to each grade was assigned a planetary object in the solar system. And it all, like, for instance, 5th degree to Mars, 4th degree to Sol, 3rd degree to Venus, etc. And I used to wonder what on earth that was about. And then when I saw these papers relating to New Isis Lodge, I realized that what Kenneth had done is he had retained from New Isis Lodge the attribution of the bodies within the solar system, but not the practices, which I thought was quite interesting. So we're gradually evolving new practices and so forth. This is kind of, if you like, taking the best of the Typhonian OTO and augmenting it. Because in the Typhonian OTO, Kenneth by that time had moved away, I think, from what you might call directly magical work. I saw a letter that he'd written to somebody in the early 70s saying that saying that he now moved into spreading Thelema rather than direct magical practice, which I kind of found interesting because I can see why, but I don't much go along for that myself personally. You know, I think that I'd much rather go for the magical and mystical practice than I would just kind of spreading the word of Thelema, because as far as I'm concerned, there isn't really anything to spread. Everyone's got to find it for themselves, you know.
Yeah.
And so therefore the best way is to give them tools, give them the support, the capability to discover these things for themselves, you know, because really at the end of the day, it's not what Aleister Crowley thought or Kenneth Grant thought or anything else. It's using these things as suggestions to arrive at your own interpretation of, say, the Book of the Law, of, say, Thelema. That's what I think anyway.
Yes, and Kenneth Grant always looked at Thelema as within a larger tradition, right? I believe he said something close to that.
Within a what tradition?
Within like a larger tradition in a big span of time, let's say.
Yes.
Other aspects that do not have to do with Thelema directly, but they are part of what Thelema is.
Yeah, well, I mean, kind of within the tantric system, for instance, you had I forget precisely what the term is, but it translates as by your own light. You know, it's very similar thing, really. And you know, I personally think that 1904, the Book of the Law, Thelema, is actually the latest iteration or version, if you like, of something that's a lot older, you know.
Yeah. And this way of now that you mentioned Tantra, there is some sort of current, I believe it's very small, of people that try to work a bit of the Book of the Law, let's say, using the Tantric system. There is a book out that is called Tantric Thelema, I believe, something like that.
Oh, okay.
And
I've not come across that. That sounds interesting.
Yes, and they even, you know, they do that sort of Buddhist refuge thing using the Thelemic gods. What do you think about that thing of using different methods? Is this what Noesis was about using different methods and combining methods?
Yeah, I think so. You see, kind of New Isis Lodge has become mythologized to an extent, but yes, I think you're right what you say. I mean, even within Hecate's Fountain and within those anecdotes in Hecate's Fountain that you read, you know, most of the anecdotes, there will be a ritual with other magicians present sometimes, you know, somebody visiting from another country, something like that. And so, yes, you know, it was an attempt at diversification. Plus, I mean, after all, at that stage in his life, Kenneth Grant, in 1952, there was this major epiphany into Advaita Vedanta.
Yeah.
And he sort of came out of that late 1954, and that changed his whole approach to spare. It had sort of deepened him considerably. But I mean, Kenneth Grant was always an eclectic man, and he always would have appreciated, you know, taking inspiration and advice from various sources. I mean, like for instance, he came across Gerald Massey in 1948, Gerald Massey's works, you know, and sort of, so, you know, he took from that. He always took from a variety of sources. He was a very, very, very Catholic person. When I say Catholic, I mean Catholic in the sense of eclectic. Yeah.
When you mention Advaita Vedanta, there is a group of writings that I believe was published at some point that I do not find right now, but it's called.
Oh, at the feet of the Guru.
Yes,
Yeah,
the one.
it's been out of print for quite a few years now. I'd like to reprint it. Not this year, but so I'd like to reprint it next year. Actually, it is very. It's a very rich selection of essays. Yes,
because it includes something about Sri Ramana Maharshi, who is, at least here, is sort of popular in the sense of being a representative of Advaita Vedanta. And you feel that that is something, because I believe in one other book, maybe Aleister Crowley and the Hidden God, Kenneth Grant says that Crowley was an Advaitin at heart. I'm not sure if it was
yes,
that.
he does. He does. Yeah, he does say that.
And what do you think about those two?
Unfortunately, though he might have been Advaitin at heart, he wouldn't have liked to have heard that, because he didn't like Advaita at all. Actually, there's a passage in Magic Without Tears in which he makes it plain that he has a violent antipathy towards Advaita. I was quite surprised when I read it, because it didn't seem. It seems so strange to have such a violent reaction to a piece of doctrine, if you like, to an idea. It seemed very odd to me.
Yes, like a very specific reaction to that aspect. But what do you? What is your impression, or let's say from your personal work? Which things do you value? Let's say that, for instance, how do you feel about Advaita Vedanta and about the work with Grant?
Well, okay. Well, the three principal, my three principal interests in terms of magicians, occultists, are Kenneth Grant, Austin Osman Spare, and Aleister Crowley. But I've got lots of interests outside of that. I have been for many years now interested in Advaita Vedanta, which I identified quite a long time ago as being at the root, if anything can be said to be at the root, of Kenneth Grant's work. Although, there's such a lot in there, but although he emerged from Advaita Vedanta in late 1954, it's the basis. It's the basis of his work. It's the basis of the Typhonian trilogies. It's always there.
Yeah, I see. And
so to be honest, my own work at the moment, after Kenneth Grant died, I kind of set about not just publishing his work, but also understanding his work. And republishing it was an ideal way of doing that, because to republish a book, you have to dive down, and really dissect it, because you kind of got to look for flaws in it and things like that and correct it. And very, very recently, soon after publication of The Ninth Arch, Watkins approached me to do a talk on The Ninth Arch. And The Ninth Arch, I'd always found it a forbidding text. And in the course of preparing, I came across a couple of passages, one of which bore directly on my own work the last year or so, and I was very surprised. And the other one, Grant was providing a way in to understanding the mode zone, and so I kind of began to grasp that properly for the first time. So it's taken me 12 years really to pick up Kenneth's work and feel confident that I can finally move forward with it.
Yes.
It might sort of seem a bit strange to you that you want to understand somebody's work to that degree and so forth, but I think it's simply that I joined the Typhonian OTO in 1976. So, it's almost 50 years now.
Yeah.
And Kenneth Grant was such a huge influence on my life.
Of course.
And so it doesn't feel for me as if I'm kind of spending all my time getting to grips with somebody else's work. It's sort of mine as well.
Of course, and it's well, we believe so. Of course, it's one of the most important writers that ever existed. So his work is.
What, Kenneth? Oh yeah. Well, I'd kind of go further personally. I mean, I personally consider Kenneth Grant's work as being the most profound body of work that I've ever come across. That I've ever come across. I mean, I know that sounds quite heady, and that sounds sort of valuing it very, very highly, but that's the way that I feel. I just haven't come across anything that is so profound.
Yes, and so rich, because he talks about so many things, and he gives an impression to the reader about many other currents and so on. I wanted to ask you about that too. There's all these currents about related to Michael Berthiaud. Do they have? He explains a lot of that, and some of us we work with that system a little bit, and we wanted to know if does that have a place today in the Typhonian order? Is there any relationship to that?
No, there's not. I mean, to be honest, kind of like say that kind of relationship between Grant and Berthiaud really belongs to, well, you've got it principally in Cults of the Shadow.
Yes.
And you've got it also to a large extent in Hecate's Fountain. I mean, part of the problem with Hecate's Fountain is that most people just kind of associate it with those anecdotes about workings of New Isis Lodge, but that only forms a small part of it. And Hecate's Fountain is divided into three parts, and one of the parts is exploring Berthiaud's work, as I recall. But no, I mean, kind of like they had their sort of heyday in the 1970s, and they remained in occasional touch and so forth. And Kenneth retained his high estimation, but sort of basically they both got on with their own work.
With their own systems. Oh, okay.
With their own systems, yeah. And so there's nothing about Berthiaud's system within our grey system, if you like. But then again, we would expect people who are interested in it to go out and study it for themselves,
And just one quick question that I just thought of. Do you have any members in Argentina or in South America right now? Yeah, right?
No, not at the moment. Not at the moment.
Okay.
Oh.
All right.
That could change.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mira, acá en la oportunidad todavía se pueden preguntar, que ya están aquí.
Ah, ok,
Listo.
pero
No, esto, mira, solo ¿querés que te pregunte?
pregúntale vos.
Okay. About true will within the Typhonian order, what could you tell us about that? Your approach to that concept?
Okay. My approach to true will is a very simple one, really. I regard it as cosmic rather than individual. I don't personally think that an individual possesses true will. True will is at a universal level, okay, and sort of what's the word? And what we experience as true will is a refraction of the universal will. We're part and parcel of the universal will. I remember once coming across a suggestion that the Greek word thelema was a fairly archaic, old-fashioned term, but that it didn't mean individual will, it actually meant God's will, you know, and sort of taking God in the sort of wider term, you know, as being, you know, I mean, I personally don't think of God as a cloud as somebody, an old man in the sky, you know, dictating this, that, and the other. I sort of tend to sort of think of Godhead, when I do, as being imminent. You know, everything that happens is an aspect of Godhead. In that sense, you know, I don't know, it's like sort of all this is Brahma, that sort of thing, you know, or the old Indian tradition that sort of absolutely everything around us is just the one actor, Brahma, who's forgotten that he's the one actor taking all the roles, and has been so caught up in the individual roles that he just forgets his wider identity. And I think that's a very, very good, very, 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 very good analogy. And I personally think that sort of the great work, to sort of use that term, is just remembering more and more, and that the ultimate goal is that sort of that Hindu term, Jivan Mukta, liberated whilst yet living. You know. Because you see, it's debatable about. I've often, when I first came into magic, when I first came across it, I thought that it was kind of waking up to truth, waking up to reality, and over the years, it's gradually it's kind of become a bit different, but it's kind of that same thing in essence. And I think that it's a matter of becoming more and more aware. I'm an Advaitin, okay, so it's becoming more and more aware that you are everything. It's difficult to put into words, isn't it? Because you can't say you are everything. It's useless, because if you're dealing with something that has abolished subject and object, you can't possibly use language to express that insight. It's just impossible. Could be simply because language is founded on the subject-object split. So,
yes, that's why Advaita has a lot of explaining and a lot of how do they call it, those sit-down satsangs, right? So they keep explaining this sort of same idea of non-duality.
Yeah, but you see, I think personally that sort of whether it's Ramana Maharshi, or you know, there's several other gurus. In the end, you know, although they're talking, and although they're sort of, you know, delivering lectures, possibly things like that, in the final analysis, what they're trying to do is they're trying to encourage the individual, the initiate, to have that experience for themselves, you know, rather than rely on the words of somebody else, you know. And you can go further and say that everything that person is saying is actually designed to sort of trigger something within you for you to experience that for yourself.
Yes, and in the system within the order, this let's say that this goal of the great work, everything that is done, could it be like some sort of alignment or awakening or a working towards that in a way?
I personally think of it in terms of an awakening, actually. It's very interesting. The great structure that Grant designed in early 1955 for the New Isis Lodge, you've got it running from 0 to 10, and so 0 will be assigned to the Earth, first to the Moon, second to Mercury, third to Venus, and then it just gradually goes up through the solar system. And then, you know, you've got Pluto, and then beyond that, you've got you've got planet Isis itself, you know, the Transplutonian planet Isis. So I see it as gradually you're moving away from being earthbound, if you like. Sorry, I'm waving my hands about so much. I've developed this habit of sort of using my hand as a sort of second tongue.
No, that's great. That's great. It helps us understand too, because you express yourself. So that's why we needed the image. Please go ahead.
Yeah, you just mentioned the transplanetary aspect of this whole thing, and I've got a question here, perhaps related to this. In both the Typhonian current and similar paths, it is sometimes thought that there is a conflict as excuse me, this is not the question. Another one. Yeah. Have to do, yes, here. What do you have to say about its place in the current of Sirius, the dog star? It has been said that there is some sort of lineage of mages who have been opening some sort of gate between this Earth and these other ancestral forces, sometimes spoken of as if hailing from Sirius. As for the opening of such a gate, some see a connection between John Dee and Kelly, Aleister Crowley, Jack Parsons, even Hubbard, Kenneth Grant, Timothy Leary, Robert Anton Wilson, etc. And some have conceptualized these forces as angels, others as extraterrestrials, others as interdimensional entities, and so on. Do you think they all dealt with the same entities? And what do you think they are? Some have proposed that even Aiwass or Lam are, well, part of this manifestation, so I have to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd like to start off by saying that Sirius isn't something that isn't something that I've thought very much about, really. To be honest, I mean, I actually caught what you said towards the end of that there when you were talking about sort of Aiwass and Lam, their natures, etc. For me, not so much Aiwass, but I've been fascinated with Lam for a number of years now. How much it has to do with Sirius, I don't know. I really don't know, because when it comes to Lam, you see, in my view, you have to go back to its roots, where the drawing came from. And it is undoubtedly connected with the Amalantrah working, undoubtedly. I say that simply because in the Amalantrah working, it's dominated by the image of the egg. I don't know if you've ever read the Amalantrah working, but it's really dominated by the image of the egg. And towards the end, one of the last seances talks about thou art to go this way. And when Crowley drew that, he used it as a frontispiece to his commentary on Blavatsky's The Voice of the Silence, to my mind, indicating that there was a strong connection between what that drawing meant and Blavatsky's The Voice of the Silence, because otherwise, why would he use it as a frontispiece? So I have a lot of respect for people. There are quite a few people that sort of think of Lam as being primarily an alien, in the sense of an extraterrestrial, in the sense of the sort of other aspects of extraterrestrialism that we've had, and I do find it very interesting that the kind of type of the grey, if you like, that sort of does look a little bit like lamb. But I personally think that lamb is something very much more profound than that. But then, having said that, I think personally that people misunderstand extraterrestrialism. In my opinion, it's not all about little green men coming from a galaxy 1,000 light years away or anything like that. I sort of tend to believe that the really interesting thing about UFOs is, well, I may be wrong, but I don't think that they're from sort of extra that they're from distant galaxies or anything like that. I think they're aspects of consciousness, and so why I mentioned lamb in that context is I sometimes think to sort of see lamb as principally an extraterrestrial entity, I think is to sort of underestimate that figure.
Yes.
I've got another question in relation to this, because practitioners who have had contact with such forces, whether they are part of our unconscious mind or anything, will quite often speak of an imminent coming of them, or at the very least, some sort of shift in civilization. Why do you think we have yet to see a palpable manifestation of these forces? Would you say these prophetical tendencies are perhaps messianic in nature? Or perhaps you think that those transternal forces or big unconscious forces have indeed made themselves known already, and in more one occasion, for example, not in a material, palpable sense, but perhaps more in strong cultural change?
Yeah, I mean, really, in a way, I'm personally sure that we will have, full-blown visitors from say distant galaxies coming sometime. And as your question hinted there, for all we know, they've already been here and left their mark in terms of civilization and influences, who knows, on literature, scientific. I always loved that bit in 2001, A Space Odyssey, where the ape sort of accidentally receives once accidentally, obviously it was designed that way, but he sort of seems to sort of take something from the monolith, and then he's kind of playing around, and he's got sort of a bone that he just moves this way, that way, and then obviously something occurs to him, and then sort of the next time, their enemies, etc., are lying in wait for them at a waterhole, and they just club them to death. So as your question hints, we could already be receiving influences. There could already have been visitors here, but we just didn't know it, or we just didn't recognize them. After all, if you look, say, the last 300 years of the human civilization has been one of extraordinary progress. Nothing much seemed to have happened for about 10,000 years, did it? And of course, as the years slip by, that the progress seems to become faster, doesn't it? For instance, we're on the cusp of AI now. And I always used to think personally that was going to be several centuries away.
Concerning centuries and possible ancient monoliths, would you say that perhaps, they speak of sort of a conflict between followers of let's say, the Set archetype and the Osirian archetype, as if this was an ancient conflict, which perhaps has been here from the very beginning, from it's as old as the Earth itself. And would you say that both tendencies need each other to exist in sort of a yin-yang way, or do you believe the more Typhonian aspect of this could perhaps have existed before and could be perhaps more legitimate?
Yeah, I think actually that, they do need each other, and sort of they are different aspects of something. I think too much can be made really of this kind of Typhonian Osirian thing, to be honest. I spent a few years working on letters between Akkad and Gerald Yorke of 1948 and 1949 that Kenneth Grant had typed out for Gerald Yorke a few months after Akkad had died in 1950. And I found it very, very interesting. I mean, when I first came across it, I found it as dry as dust within the last year. With it, that last year of preparing it for publication, I found it anything but dry as dust. But one thing that I did find particularly interesting was his declaration in 1948 of the incoming of the Ian of Marx. Now, Gerald Yorke reacted to that incredulously because of course Gerald Yorke was thinking in terms of late Crowley, which assigned approximately 2,000 years to each of the eons, and that therefore under that system, Marx would be about 2,000 years away. However, Crowley didn't always think in those terms, and Akkad certainly didn't. And kind of like these letters between Gerald Yorke and Frater Akkad following his declaration of the incoming of Ian and Marx, they're very, very interesting because you can tell that Akkad hadn't thought about this matter too much, which was why he must have really relished having these exchanges of letters with Gerald Yorke, because it was making him think about things more. And sort of basically he hits upon the idea of simultaneity, whereby you could see Marx as being an aspect, Ian and Marx being an aspect of the Ian of Horace, vice versa. It's just that we've got used to things being 2,000 years. Now, one of the things that repelled Akkad about the Ian of Horace, and it repelled Yorke as well, because Yorke was very candid. He said to Akkad, I would love this, because Akkad had said that the sort of violence of Ian of Horace was now at an end and was being ameliorated. Yorke said, "I would love that to be true, but I'm not sure it is true." You see, there are some parts of the Book of the Law that I can't stand. I really don't like. I never have liked some of those parts, and they're predominantly parts in the second and the third chapter. This kind of idea, this kind of warlike idea, this kind of very, very masculine idea of kind of being very, very harsh towards your supposed inferiors or people you see as below them, or the sort of thing. You count the day wasted if you haven't kicked 8 beggars before breakfast. I mean, obviously I exaggerate, but I'm sure you get the drift of what I mean. And I just don't like that force and fire aspect of Horace. I never have. And so who knows, maybe that's one of the things that attracted me to Akkad and to the Ian of Mart. But as far as Ians go, I personally think that all Ians are happening all of the time. I don't personally see them in terms of intervals of time, like 2,000 years, etc. In his so-called old chapter to the Book of the Law, talking of the next Eon, Crowley said, well, it might be 500 years or it might be 10,000 years hence, because time is not there as here, And in that last year, while I was preparing the book, I was trying to understand when it was that Crowley shifted from that position into the position of 2,000 years odd for each Eon. And I actually came to the conclusion that he hit upon that as a direct rebuke to Akkad, because they had a correspondence in 1936, and Akkad was talking about the Ian of Mart, and Crowley never said, "Oh, you stupid fool, that's 2,000 years away." I believe it was only after that, because they sort of had a falling out. It was great correspondence, but then they had another falling out, and I think that it was a reaction to that Crowley actually assigned this 2,000 years, approximately 2,000, i.e. he tied it to the astronomical phenomena of the precession of the equinoxes.
Yeah. Yeah.
He'd never done that before, and I mean, if somebody proved me wrong on that, I'd be very interested. I would. It's just that I've asked various people who should know, various people who know Crowley's system much better than I do, and nobody knows when Crowley moved away, when Crowley moved towards this kind of 2,000 years plus for each Eon, and it's kind of really, really fascinating.
Yeah.
Anyway, I've deviated a bit from the question.
No, it's very interesting. Yes.
It's all related. In fact, I think we could now ask Eduardo's questions here, because we are talking about eons and it's been a very lengthy amount of time. He wanted to ask you about Lovecraft. The questions are the following. Do you believe that Lovecraft was not really a writer of magnificent and horrific fiction, but a kind of psychic who presented his revelations through the narrative?
No, I don't actually. I'll tell you why. I mean, I love Lovecraft's work. I would be quite candid on this. I mean, there are some bits. My very favourite is The Dreams in the Witch House. I love that. Probably closely followed by the case of Charles Dexter Ward. And I love Lovecraft's stuff, but this is a big but. If you read here, I think it was Arkham House published. I think it was across 5 volumes, his correspondence and so forth. And what comes over in that is certainly for most of his life, he was a rationalist. He didn't like occultism, anything like that. So he was a rationalist. He was a materialist. Towards the end of his life, he started to shift, but he would still have been classed as a skeptic, I think. The real case, though, about Lovecraft is that sort of he was having intense dreams, and there was some sort of contact going on in those dreams, unbeknownst to him. All he would know is that he would have very, very intense dreams. And there's a really interesting. Arkham House brought out a volume called Dreams and Fancies. I think it came out in the mid-60s. I'm not sure. And what it is, in his letters, he would kind of describe a dream, and so you have the dream side by side with the story that it sparked. And the really interesting thing about it is it varies so much. They vary so much. I mean, in one, it was clearly sparked by the dream, but it's not really there. In another story, it would be virtually verbatim. It's very interesting from that. So really, the case of Lovecraft isn't that he was knowingly channeling this stuff, but that actually he was drawing upon something. And I personally see Lovecraft as a type, because I think that the creative process is inspiration, and it's inspiration coming from outside the person, and that's because I don't think that imagination at the end of the day is an individual thing. That what we think of as our imagination is merely the shallows, and beyond that you're going into cosmic imagination, or the collective unconscious, call it what you will, and all artists draw they just draw upon that. I mean I've experienced that for myself in a very, very minor way. When I mean sort of my principal means of expression is writing, and sometimes it just flows. It just flows, and you've kind of hit a really, really good bit of the speed and spontaneity, and it's flowing. Other times, it's really slow going, and it's like pulling teeth. But yeah, so have I made myself clear on that?
Yes,
Yes,
absolutely.
very nice.
Okay.
And we could relate this to something that you said before about these entities that are farther and farther from the Earth in the sense of the system as inspiration. Maybe they are entities that we perceive as entities, or maybe they are this sort of abstract inspiration that flows through us, but in either case, they unite us with the divine, right? It's like in that sense.
I'd kind of like to mention in this context, so I think it's got something to do with it, that film that was made with Jodie Foster, Contact, many, many years ago. And there's a bit in there whereby this kind of space capsule is built, and sort of like, so like she goes away somewhere else, except that the thing never actually took off. She's been there all the time, but she's in another world, whatever, and her father comes across to her and starts talking. But in the course of the conversation, he's getting quite candid, and he's saying, Jodie, it's not really me. What's happening is your memories of me are just being used in order to communicate, and the reason why I mention that is because sort of in your question, I think that perhaps somebody or something trying to communicate will actually, if you want to communicate with somebody, you've got to do it in terms that they will understand, so like the way that they appear to you might not be the way that they actually are, but they're appearing in a specific way in order that you'll see them.
Yes.
Sometimes it has been suggested that there might be some very, 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 very secret group of ancient practitioners here on Earth that could have been influencing different important occultists or magicians.
Yeah.
Gurdjieff talked about them as the Sarmul, and I believe that in the Typhonian order there could have been some mention sometimes of lost or not so lost Sufi influence. What do you think about this? Do you think it's possible that there might be some occult brotherhood we don't know about, hailing from some?
Oh, yeah. I mean, but you see, the word the words that you've used there, you know, could be, well, I'd be a fool to say no, because, like, say, that would imply that I know everything there is to know at the present. And one thing I've learned in my life, all my life, of being in the occult, is that you have experiences and you set up theories, and I've never yet set up a theory that hasn't been superseded, that hasn't been smashed apart. So now, absolutely everything that I have is working theory, you know, because there've been so many occasions that I thought that I got to the final summit, and it turns out not to be the case. So that therefore, I mean, the sort of idea you're talking about, I mean, some would see that as fanciful, but I wouldn't rule it out. I wouldn't rule anything out, really.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, sort of while you were talking about that, I sort of personally felt a little bit that it was a little bit reminiscent of Blavatsky's Mahatmas, you know, in the fastnesses of Tibet and so forth, communicating with her.
Yes, and with the letters that they gave her, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you see, I mean, there's a lot of dispute about that, isn't it? You know, about whether it existed or not, whether it was a forgery or not. You know, but you know, it could well be. It could well be that is the case. I wouldn't rule it out.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Una pregunta tuya, Saka. Está diciendo, Jessica, para ponerte en mal.
No, creo que más o menos está
Okay.
eso.
We're trying to see if there's any other questions left. Any other people? Eso sí.
Hablamos de Advaita también, ¿no?
Okay.
Sí.
Y esto sería, si estuve esperando algo últimamente, si no tengo otra pregunta sobre esto.
Pregunta de
Okay, what about this? We've talked about true will, and you gave us your personal thoughts on this, about this being more than an individual thing and more of a cosmic thing. And Crowley used to talk about black magic or the Black Brotherhood in terms of those perhaps sometimes advanced practitioners who would not give up their, I don't know if to say individuality, but as practitioners who wouldn't be prepared to cross the abyss, in the sense of giving all of their self. So as to say.
Yeah, you're talking about people who cling to the notion of self, aren't you? Really? I mean, sort of Crowley expressed it as somebody who wouldn't want to sort of press all of their blood into sort of the Grail, the universal thing. Yeah, you see, it varies an awful lot about what people mean by Black Brothers, etc. So, what was the question again?
Just what did you think about that? If you thought there's anything that we could speak of in terms of black magic, because Crowley used to say that black magic was anything that would turn you away from true will.
Yeah, but you see, the problem that there is with that sentiment from Crowley is that he didn't stick to it himself, because, like, say, he couldn't stand, he hated Advaita so much. And I was very puzzled when I first came across it. It's a passage in Magic in Theory and Practice, and he makes it plain that he's got a violent antipathy. He even uses terms like I can't trust myself to even describe this doctrine to you fairly. You know, that is a very, very violent reaction. And I was taken aback, and I thought of, there are times, you know, Crowley did mystical verse, mystical poetry like nothing else I've come across. Some of it is so beautiful. And in one of his instructions, Liber Viva Reguli, towards the end of it, it goes off into this absolutely gorgeous piece of prose, absolutely lovely. And I was thinking, but surely this is at odds. But sort of with Crowley, so much of it is the old Golden Dawn system of adopting the God form of a god, and actually becoming a god. But as opposed to the idea of you don't exist and you're a drop that's going back into the ocean, and so forth. And he didn't like that idea. I don't think he didn't like that idea at all. So he will have said that at one time, but it's, you know, he wouldn't have been able to follow through on it, I'm afraid. Yeah. Because he himself, I mean, Grant says that Crowley is an Advaitine at heart. Well, that might be true, but certainly Crowley, the man, he was too attached. He was too attached to virility. He was too attached to himself. He has sort of, in his retirement on Aesopus Island, which he pursued with a mixture of intense yogic meditation and drugs. And he describes somewhere, he alludes to a meditation that he's had, and he said, I can't understand how, knowing this, my fellow maguses carried on. And that, I thought that was quite an interesting thing to say. And you think about it, and you think, surely to God, the only conclusion can be that they're going to disappear. You know, that in the final analysis, they don't exist. And I think Crowley would have found that idea, you know, revolting, really. Yeah. I mean, having said that, who knows? You know, who knows when I die, I might not want to go, you know. So, but, you know, so it's all, I mean, I often think when Crowley makes remarks like that, he's talking from an ideal position, but he himself certainly wouldn't have pressed every drop of blood into the cup of Babylon. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Would you say that perhaps you are looking for this and the Typhonian current? Would you say that dropping every bit of blood would be mandatory, so as to say?
Or the goal?
I mean,
mandatory.
Yeah, it's I know it's not mandatory, but would you say?
No. But I think personally, it's just the way. Just the way that it's going to happen. I mean, as I get older, my sort of idea of death changes a lot. Like when you're young and someone close to you dies, it's catastrophic. When you're into your 70s and sort of people that you know are just kind of falling by the wayside, you have an entirely different idea. You know, you observe around you, you know, in nature that it cycles, you know, and sort of things live and they die. And if they don't die, they're not making room for other people to come up and have experiences and so forth. It seems a little selfish to want to live forever, really, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Perhaps this the difference between someone who is a practitioner, let's say, and someone who isn't, is that in both cases, they're going to be dropping every bit of blood, but one will do it willingly or knowingly, or we.
Yeah, well, you know, whether you do it willingly or not makes little difference in the final analysis.
The cosmic will present itself in both cases, and
well, but you see, that's another thing, isn't it? You know, there is a cosmic will, and kind of like, you know, why hang on to a particular expression of it? You know, our experience is that everything else, you know, sort of has its day. Yeah, I'm thinking primarily in terms of Spare's best mass theory of the best mass, you know, which is a sort of a perpetual transformation of form and force, you know, everything going on. You know, sort of like, I think that we are eternal, but not in terms of the individual that we're experiencing. You know, I mean, personally, I can't wait to find out. Well, I mean, I can, because obviously, you know, I'm quite happy to hang around. But you know, I'm going to be finding it really, really interesting to sort of see what happens.
What happens? Yes, it's for me. It's all. I think
Yes.
this is a great.
We don't want to abuse of your time.
Your time.
We suppose that in your country now is late.
It must be late. Yes,
No?
it must be late.
Here is 5 in the
5 in the
PM.
afternoon.
But
Yes.
yeah. Here is the
5
hour.
in the afternoon.
But we suppose that you are in London. Are you in London?
London, yeah, London, northwest London.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
We're just a mile from Golders Green.
cool. So we're incredibly thankful for your time. I mean, this has been incredibly enlightening, actually. You know, in a way, to be able to talk about all these very important things to us, and also to connect with Vita. This is very interesting for me.
Okay, well, I mean, basically, if you'd like to kind of pursue specific things within that, within what I've said, like Advaita Vedanta, if you want to do another Zoom session sometime, I'm perfectly happy to sort of talk about it.
Yes, we would love to do that.
It's very dear to my heart, actually, Advaita Vedanta, and Spare's very dear to my heart as well. You know.
Great. Yes, we would like that very, very much. We will
Okay.
keep in touch. We will keep in touch, and also maybe we can keep talking about the order. Right now, the order is you meant in
Yes.
transition, but it is working. You are accepting new members. People
Oh
can.
yeah, sure. Yeah. There's basically we've got a membership board, a membership secretary within the order called Edward Gauntlet, and I mean, I can give you his email address if you want.
Yes, we would like
Okay,
that very much.
it's admin at starfirepublishing.co.uk.
Yes, like the publishing house, admin at the Starfire Publishing. .co.uk.
Yeah, Starfire Publishing, one word, .co.uk. Yeah.
Yes.
And I mean, so if you're not sure about it, just let me know by email, and I'll give it to you again. But yeah, I mean, basically, he picks up all order inquiries to that mailbox.
Yeah, so that also people that are listening to this, you know, they know where to go. They know
Yeah.
what happened with Grant's order after he died, and how everything is active. And it's we believe, you know, that you are the most serious person in the sense of having an awareness of what is really Thelema and what is really the legacy of both Crowley and Kenneth Grant. So thank you very, very much. Very, very much.
I've enjoyed it. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
We will talk to you soon, okay? Thank you.
Okay.
That's, thank you very much,
Thank you very
Michael.
Thank you.
93.
93.
93.
luxury, you're lost within the wanderings of my mind. I'm cutting branches from the trees, shaped by years of memories, to exercise the ghosts from inside of me. The sound of waves in a pool of water, I'm drowning in my nostalgia. Sound of waves in a pool of water, I'm drowning